Who would believe that a man who seemed complete could battle insecurity, especially one as humiliating as a tiny manhood? Hit subscribe and turn on your notifications, as we take you on a story cruise about a man who turned his deepest insecurity into a public spectacle. Welcome to the Ultimate Wife Challenge. That night, Accra didn't sleep. From OSU to East Legon, the city glowed brighter than usual, as if even the streetlights were eager to witness the drama unfolding on the rooftop of Harrington Towers, a skyscraper that touched the stars. Helicopters circled above. Cameras blinked like restless fireflies. The world was about to watch a billionaire choose a wife. Miles Harrington stood at the edge of the stage, his silhouette sharp against the velvet skyline. Gold spotlights poured over him, catching every line of the navy tuxedo he wore. He looked untouchable, every movement deliberate, every glance calculated. The crowd saw power, only he felt the pulse of anxiety beating beneath that calm exterior. Across the rooftop, 3 women waited under the warm night air. Their outfits shimmered with modern Ghanaian elegance, bright wrappers tied fashionably, beads glinting at their wrists. Cameras panned slowly, feeding every frame to millions watching live. Miles' voice rolled through the speakers, smooth, deep, the kind of voice that made even silence pay attention. "Tonight," he said, "one woman leaves this rooftop with a ring. But this isn't about beauty. It's about truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone expected glamour, not philosophy. Yet Miles' eyes stayed steady. Behind him, a banner read the Ultimate Wife Challenge in bold gold letters. He paused, scanning the finalists. Amelia Ford, sharp-eyed lawyer, posture straight as a verdict. Sierra Blake, fashion influencer, every gesture at camera cue. Elise Monroe, quiet social worker with a gaze calm enough to unsettle the loudest room. Miles inhaled, the humid air thick with perfume and tension. This contest had started as a show of power, a distraction from whispers he'd spent years silencing. But as the lights blazed hotter, he wondered if tonight would expose more than he intended. The master of ceremonies, Daniel Cole, Miles' oldest friend and PR genius, stepped up beside him, smiling for the cameras. "Accra," Daniel announced, his voice booming. "The moment you've all been waiting for." Applause roared. Music thundered. Fireworks bloomed behind the glass walls. Miles forced a smile, the practiced billionaire expression he'd mastered for boardrooms and magazine covers. But inside, his chest tightened. He could see the reflection of his face in the glass. Perfect, successful, yet empty. For years, that image had been his armor. Tonight, he was about to shatter it. He remembered the first meeting that birthed this madness. Daniel had pitched it half-jokingly. "You need a softer image, bro. People love romance. Give them a show." Miles had laughed then, thinking it would be good PR, a distraction from everything he hated about himself. But now, watching those 3 women waiting for him to choose, the laughter felt like a memory from another life. The first round of the night began. Questions from the audience, answers from the contestants. Reporters shouted, lights flashed. Amelia answered each question like cross-examination, brilliant but intense. Sierra charmed everyone, tossing smiles like confetti. Elise spoke softly, choosing words that landed like calm water on fire. Miles listened, nodding, applauding at the right moments. But his focus drifted to Elise. There was something in the way she didn't perform. She simply existed, grounded and unbothered by the spectacle. Halfway through, a gust of wind swept across the rooftop, fluttering decorations and sending whispers through the crowd. Miles caught Elise steadying one of the smaller banners. A small gesture, but it felt real, unplanned. Daniel leaned toward him. "She's good TV," he murmured. "Natural." Miles gave a faint smile. "She's not acting," he replied. The evening slid into the final decision. Cameras zoomed closer. Champagne bottles stood ready. A velvet box gleamed on the podium. Miles stepped forward again, the crowd falling into expectant silence. He could almost hear his heartbeat in the microphone. He'd spent years hiding behind power, jet engines, board meetings, endless zeros in bank accounts. But money had never silenced the insecurity that haunted him when the lights went out. He'd buried it under arrogance, under control, under his carefully built legend. Tonight he was done hiding. "Before I choose," Miles began, "there's something I need to say." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't in the script. Miles continued anyway. "I've built an empire from nothing. I've been called brilliant, ruthless, proud, and maybe I am. But behind all that, there's a part of me I've spent years ashamed of. A part that money couldn't fix." The rooftop went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "I know what the world says a man should be," he said quietly. "Strong. Perfect. Complete. I'm not any of those things, not completely. And if I'm going to give someone my name, she deserves to know that." Whispers rippled through the crowd, cameras tilting closer. Daniel's hand tightened on the cue cards. Miles looked at each woman in turn. Amelia's eyes flashed, curiosity mixed with disbelief. Sierra's perfect smile faltered. Elise simply waited, eyes steady. "I'm not asking for pity," Miles said, his tone firm now. "I'm asking for honesty. If you can't love a man who isn't perfect, that's fine. But tonight, I'm choosing truth over image." For a moment, no one moved. Then Amelia exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Sierra looked down, pretending to adjust her earring. Only Elise stepped forward. She didn't smile, she didn't perform. She met Miles' gaze and said softly, "Sometimes what we hide is the only part of us that's real." It wasn't loud, but it carried. Every microphone caught it, every viewer at home heard it. Miles blinked. The rooftop blurred for a second, lights, noise, and disbelief mixing into something almost peaceful. He reached out his hand. Elise took it. The crowd gasped. Daniel, ever the showman, quickly shouted into the mic, "Ladies and gentlemen, your winner." Applause erupted, fireworks cracked open the sky, and reporters surged forward. But Miles barely heard any of it. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't performing. He turned slightly toward Elise, voice low enough for only her. "You have no idea what you just saved me from." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I do." The cameras caught their joined hands, the confetti, the champagne. On screens across Ghana, the image froze, perfect ending to a perfect fairy tale. But inside Miles, something else began. Relief. Fear. A strange, fragile hope. Later that night, after the guests had left and the music faded, Miles stood alone on the same rooftop. The city stretched before him, thousands of lights flickering like restless thoughts. Daniel appeared, jacket slung over one shoulder. "That was brave," he said quietly. "Or stupid," Miles replied. Daniel chuckled. "Maybe both. But people love you now, for real." Miles looked out at the skyline. "For real," he repeated, tasting the words like something new. Behind them, the last of the banners flapped in the breeze, the ultimate wife challenge glowing faintly in the moonlight. Miles didn't know yet what tomorrow's headlines would say. Maybe he'd be mocked. Maybe admired. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. He'd come to choose a wife. Instead, he'd chosen truth. And somewhere deep inside, under the noise and pride, that truth finally began to feel like freedom. Every man has something he hides from the world. But for Miles Harrington, his secret wasn't buried in a scandal or crime. It lived inside him, whispering that he would never be enough. They said he was born with everything: looks, intelligence, and money. But what they never saw was how early his world taught him that perfection wasn't a gift, it was a weapon. Miles grew up in the quiet wealth of East Ridge, Accra, a mansion wrapped in silence and rules. His father, Richard Harrington, was a British investor who built half the city's skyline. His mother, Caroline, a Ghanaian businesswoman who believed emotions were a sign of weakness. At 5, Miles learned how to sit still for dinner, how to answer questions like a grown man, how to hide his tears. But some things can't be trained away. There was always that one thing he couldn't control. A feeling that no matter how much he achieved, something in him would always fall short. And when kids in school joked about what made a real man, Miles laughed along, pretending it didn't sting. Pretending he wasn't quietly measuring himself against everyone else. By 16, that shame had turned into fire. He became obsessed with being untouchable, the smartest, the richest, the most admired. His grades were flawless, his clothes tailored, his charm lethal. He didn't chase girls, they chased him. But he never let any of them close enough to see the cracks. After his father died, Myles inherited not just the empire, but the expectation that came with it. Never show weakness, his mother told him at the funeral. Power doesn't forgive softness. He took those words literally. By 28, Myles had built Harrington Global, a multi-billion real estate and tech conglomerate stretching from Ghana to London. The media called him the modern Midas. His name alone could move markets. He bought the tallest buildings, the fastest cars, the rarest art, anything that screamed control. But the louder his success became, the quieter his nights grew. He'd stare at the city lights from his penthouse balcony, the hum of traffic below sounding like applause. Yet, deep inside, he knew none of it filled the hollow part of him that whispered, "You're still not enough." Every relationship ended the same way. Distant, controlled, emotionless. He'd give women the world but keep himself locked behind walls. They called him cold, arrogant, heartless. And maybe he was. Because every time someone tried to love him, all he could think was, if they really knew me, they'd leave. Then came Daniel Cole, his right-hand man and oldest friend. Daniel was everything Myles wasn't: warm, grounded, human. He'd known Myles since boarding school, seen him at his worst. One night, after another breakup hit the headlines, Daniel dropped a line that stuck. "Bro, you can buy the world, but you can't buy peace. At some point, you have to let someone love the real you, whatever that means." Myles didn't reply. He just looked out the window, jaw tight. Because he didn't believe anyone could. Rumors began to swirl about why the billionaire couldn't keep a woman. The tabloids fed on it, whispering about his coldness, his inability to commit, his unseen flaw. And though Myles ignored the gossip, it gnawed at him. Every headline was a reminder that his secret had become a mystery for the world to solve. He needed to prove something, not to the public, but to himself. So when the idea of the Ultimate Wife Challenge was first pitched by a PR strategist as a fun, modern way to choose a philanthropic ambassador, Myles saw an opportunity. A controlled test. A game he could win. What if I could find someone who loved me, not for money, not for fame, but for what I am underneath? He'd said quietly, almost to himself. Daniel had laughed. Holding a love contest? That's either genius or insane. Maybe both, Myles replied. But deep down, the contest wasn't about love. It was about proving that even with his hidden flaws, he could still be desired, respected, chosen. That he could control the narrative before it controlled him. Weeks later, the plan became public, and Accra went wild. The nation's most private billionaire was launching a televised contest to find a wife. The internet broke overnight. Everyone had an opinion. Some called it romantic. Others called it a publicity stunt. But nobody knew the truth, that it was Myles's final gamble to bury the one insecurity he could never outgrow. Applications flooded in from across Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, even the UK. Over 10,000 women sent videos. From those, only 12 were chosen, bold, intelligent, beautiful in their own ways. As the event drew closer, Myles spent nights alone in his penthouse, replaying what he'd set in motion. He wasn't looking for love anymore. He was looking for redemption. The night before the challenge, he stood in front of his mirror, a man sculpted by wealth, dressed in a custom charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars. But as his reflection stared back, all he saw was the boy who'd once hated himself. He closed his eyes and whispered, "This time, they'll see me how I choose to be seen." Outside, the Accra skyline shimmered, bright, restless, alive. And somewhere across the city, 12 women were preparing for the moment that would change their lives forever. Meanwhile, Daniel watched from his office, worried. He knew Myles too well. He knew that behind every move, every smile, every word, there was a storm brewing. And he feared this contest wouldn't bring Myles peace. It would bring him face to face with the one thing he'd spent his whole life running from. In a city where power is everything, one man's secret will test the meaning of love, pride, and redemption. And when the truth finally surfaces, Not everyone will survive it. As the night of the challenge arrives, the cameras begin to roll. The music swells. Miles steps onto the stage. And the game begins. Every empire looks flawless until the cracks begin to show. The morning sun rose gold over Accra, bouncing off glass towers and camera rigs outside the Ocean View Hotel. The air smelled of sea salt, perfume, and nervous excitement. Reporters crowded the velvet ropes, microphones ready, as sleek black cars lined up one after another. Inside, 12 women waited behind the curtain, each one dressed in bold Ghanaian prints, their confidence shimmering like the gold thread in their fabric. Today wasn't about beauty, it was about presence. At exactly 9 a.m., the stage lights flared, and the event that had divided an entire nation began. The Ultimate Wife Challenge. The audience roared as Miles Harrington stepped into view. Tailored suit. Stoic expression. The billionaire who never smiled. But beneath the calm exterior, his pulse was a storm. Every pair of eyes watching him felt like judgment. Every camera flash felt like exposure. Still, he walked tall. The picture of power, his insecurity buried deep under a mask of perfection. "Good morning, Ghana," his voice echoed. "Welcome to the Ultimate Wife Challenge, where grace, intellect, and strength meet heart." The crowd cheered again, and somewhere behind the stage, Daniel Cole exhaled in relief. For now, everything looked controlled. But control is fragile. The first challenge was simple, at least, that's what the producers said. Each contestant would introduce herself not just by name, but by purpose. Why she was there. What she stood for. What kind of partner she believed a man like Miles needed. One by one, the women stepped forward. Sierra Blake, 27, a brand strategist from Kumasi with eyes like trouble and a confidence that filled the room. "I'm not here to impress," she said coolly. "I'm here to challenge. Every king needs someone who won't kneel." The audience gasped, half in awe, half in disbelief. Miles's eyes lingered on her a moment longer than they should have. Next was Elise Monroe, 25, a fashion designer from Cape Coast with soft eyes and a quiet strength. "I believe love is not about power," she said gently. "It's about patience, the kind that listens even when pride wants to speak." Miles tilted his head, intrigued. Then came Amelia Ford, 29, a journalist known for her bold writing and unapologetic honesty. She smiled at the billionaire like she already knew his story. "Some people wear masks so long they forget who they are. I'm here to remind you." The room went silent. Miles's jaw tightened. Something in her tone cut straight through his armor. For a second, he looked unsettled. Daniel noticed from the side stage, whispering under his breath, "Oh no, she's going to get under his skin." The next segment tested creativity. Each woman had to pitch a charity idea using Harrington Global's resources. The lights dimmed as holographic screens projected their concepts, from tech education for girls to clean energy villages. But it wasn't the ideas that caught attention, it was how they spoke. Sierra's pitch burned with passion, sharp and assertive. Elisa's glowed with empathy. Amelia's, though, was different. She looked straight at Miles and said, "You've built walls taller than your buildings. I'd use your money to build doors instead." The crowd erupted. Miles's expression didn't change, but his grip on the microphone did. For the first time, his mask cracked. When the segment ended, the contestants were escorted to a private dinner. The cameras stayed outside, but whispers filled the hall. Sierra rolled her eyes at the others. "This isn't a charity event. It's a power test. Whoever can read him wins." Elise sighed. "Maybe it's not about reading him. Maybe it's about seeing him." Amelia only smiled. "You can't win a game if you don't know what's being played." Miles entered moments later, calm, magnetic, unreadable. His presence froze the table. He made small talk, asked about their backgrounds, their ambitions, their fears. But deep inside, every word was calculation. He wasn't listening to their answers. He was watching how they reacted to him. Daniel joined him after dinner, stepping aside with a quiet warning. "You know this could backfire, right? People are already questioning your motives." Miles looked out the window at the sea beyond. "Let them question. I need to see who can handle pressure." Or maybe, Daniel said, you just want to see who won't leave once they realize you're human. Miles said nothing. The silence was answer enough. That night, the city glittered with gossip. Social feeds flooded with clips from the challenge, Sierra's fierce speech trending under #QueenEnergy, Elisa's calm poise under #WifeMaterial, and Amelia's haunting line, build doors, not walls. Miles scrolled through them alone in his penthouse, a glass of whiskey in hand. Every comment praising Amelia felt like exposure, as if the world could suddenly see through him. But he couldn't look away. He replayed her clip again, her eyes steady, her voice calm, her words echoing the one thing he'd spent his life denying, vulnerability. Outside, lightning flashed across the horizon. A storm was coming. Pride can build empires, but it cannot build peace. And in Miles Harrington's empire, the first crack had just appeared. As the thunder rolled over the city, Miles turned from the window, unaware that by morning, one contestant would disappear, one secret would leak, and everything he'd built to protect himself would begin to fall apart. Every show begins as a performance, until reality starts to bleed through the lights. By the third day of the Ultimate Wife Challenge, the whole of Ghana was watching. Cafes, offices, schools, everyone had an opinion about who should win. Sierra had fans. Elise had admirers. Amelia had the nation divided. For Miles, the attention was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. His empire had never seen this much public warmth, and yet, for the first time, he felt exposed. He watched the morning coverage in his penthouse, every host analyzing his expressions, his gestures, his rumored connections to certain contestants. It's good for the brand, his PR team said. But Miles didn't want fame. He wanted control. And that was slipping fast. At noon, the contestants gathered at Harrington Global's Innovation Center for their next challenge, designing a public campaign that represented strength and unity. The room was all glass and chrome, filled with cameras and crew. Sierra arrived first, bold and glowing in her Kent print jumpsuit. Elise followed, calm as always, notebook in hand. But when the roll call reached Amelia, silence. She wasn't there. Daniel checked the schedule twice, frowning. Maybe she's late, he murmured. But an hour passed, and still no Amelia. Miles's jaw tensed. The last thing he needed was chaos on live television. He dismissed the cameras, ending the session early. The other contestants whispered among themselves, theories flying faster than logic. By evening, hashtags began to trend. Hashtag where is Amelia? Hashtag ultimate wife scandal. Some claimed she'd quit. Others said she'd been removed for breaking a rule. A few whispered darker things, that she'd uncovered something about Miles the show didn't want public. The rumors spread like fire. Daniel stormed into Miles's office that night, phone in hand. We need to say something before the press builds their own story. Miles was staring out at the city again, hands folded behind him. Say what, Daniel? That I lost control of my own contest? That one of the contestants vanished without a trace? Better you say it than them. Miles turned slowly, his face unreadable. Find her first. Then we talk. But his voice was quieter than usual, the calm edge of someone holding too much inside. 2 days later, Amelia finally appeared, at a press conference she'd organized herself. Cameras flashed as she stepped onto the stage, poised, confident, unbroken. She didn't accuse him of anything, didn't make a scene. Instead, she said, some people build empires to hide from who they are. But you can't fix pain with power. Then she walked off, leaving reporters in a frenzy. The message was vague, but to the public, it was clear enough. Something inside the Ultimate Wife Challenge wasn't what it seemed. Back at Harrington Global, chaos erupted. Investors called, demanding answers. The PR team scrambled. Daniel argued with producers, insisting they shut down the show. But Miles refused. She doesn't control my story, he said flatly. Maybe not, Daniel shot back. But right now, she controls the truth. That hit harder than either of them admitted. Because deep down, Miles knew it wasn't Amelia who'd exposed him. It was his own reflection, the man he'd become. That night, he wandered through the empty event hall alone. The banners still hung, the lights still glowed, but it all felt hollow. The voice in his head, the one that had haunted him since childhood, whispered again, "You can't be loved for who you are." For a long time, he believed it. But Amelia's words kept echoing, "You can't fix pain with power." He poured himself a drink, staring at his own reflection in the glass wall. For once, he didn't look like the untouchable billionaire. He looked human. Tired. Well, Daniel found him like that, silent under the soft city lights. "You can still fix this," Daniel said quietly. "How?" "Tell the truth. Not to them, to yourself." Miles didn't answer. He just set his drink down and walked out. The next morning, a public statement hit every major network. The Ultimate Wife Challenge would end early. The remaining contestants would receive full support for their charity projects, but no one would be crowned a winner. The internet exploded, half in outrage, half in praise. Some said it was a cover-up. Others said it was the first real sign of humility from a man who'd never shown any. For once, Miles didn't care about the headlines. He stayed off camera, away from the noise. He drove to the edge of the city, to an unfinished Harrington Global site overlooking the ocean. There, surrounded by silence, he finally breathed. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe the real challenge had never been about finding a wife. Maybe it was about finding himself. Days later, Amelia sent a message through Daniel. It wasn't an apology. Just a line written in her calm, cutting style. "When you stop performing, you'll start living." Miles read it once, folded it, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He didn't respond. But for the first time, he smiled, not the practiced one for the cameras, but a small, uncertain smile that felt almost real. The city moved on. The show faded into social media memory. But for Miles Harrington, something had shifted. He began visiting his company's projects more often, not in suits, not with cameras, just as himself. He talked to employees, listened to their stories. The man who once lived behind mirrors started walking among people again. He didn't call it redemption. He called it starting over. Every story about power eventually becomes a story about truth. And in Accra, where wealth glitters brighter than the sea, one man finally learned that pride can't buy peace, and that sometimes, the only empire worth saving is the one inside your heart. Months had passed since the scandal. The world had moved on, but for Miles Harrington, time felt slower. The once glamorous skyscrapers of Harrington Global now looked different to him, not like trophies, but like mirrors. Everywhere he turned, he saw reflections of the man he used to be. Proud, unreachable, afraid to be seen. He didn't host parties anymore. No more red carpet interviews, no new projects launched with fireworks. Instead, he spent his mornings driving through the city in a simple black SUV, visiting the places his money had touched but his presence never had. One afternoon, he stopped at a community center his foundation had built years ago. Children were playing soccer on a dusty field. A teacher recognized him and ran over, surprised. "Mr. Harrington, we didn't expect." "I just came to see how things are going," he interrupted softly. The teacher smiled. "Better, now that you're here." For the first time, those words didn't sound like flattery. They sounded human. At the office, Daniel noticed the change too. The billionaire who once ruled through fear now asked questions. Listened. He still carried himself with authority, but his tone had softened, his eyes steadier. One evening, as they walked out of the building, Daniel nudged him. "You're different." Miles shrugged. "Maybe I finally realized power doesn't have to be a wall." Daniel smiled. "Took you long enough." They both laughed, something they hadn't done in years. Amelia, meanwhile, had become a quiet sensation. Her speech from the press conference, "You can't fix pain with power," had gone viral across Africa. She'd started her own media foundation for young writers, giving women a voice in storytelling. Her success didn't surprise Miles. It humbled him. He saw her face on a talk show one evening, calm, intelligent, grounded, and instead of anger, he felt gratitude. She had forced him to confront the truth, and that had saved him more than any deal ever could. Weeks later, they met again, not at a gala, not on camera, but in a small cafe tucked behind OSU's busy streets. She was already there, sipping tea, reading a book. When she looked up, her eyes didn't hold judgment. Just quiet curiosity. Miles Harrington, she said with a faint smile. Didn't think I'd see you here. I didn't think I'd come, he admitted. But I owed you thanks. For ending your own show? For starting my life again. She set her cup down. You didn't need me for that. Maybe not. But sometimes, it takes someone brave enough to hold up a mirror. Amelia studied him for a long moment. The arrogance was gone. What stood before her wasn't the proud billionaire everyone had feared. It was a man who had finally learned to breathe. Then maybe, she said, you finally understand what all this was really about. He nodded. It wasn't about finding a wife. It was about learning how to be a man. They both smiled, not romantically, but knowingly, like two people who had survived the same storm from opposite shores. Months turned into a year. Harrington Global transformed. The company began investing in mentorship programs, sustainable housing, and creative education. People started calling it the new Harrington era, a movement built on empathy rather than ego. And though Miles still wore the tailored suits and carried the same quiet power, there was a new lightness to him. The world no longer saw a mystery. They saw a man who'd chosen peace over perfection. One evening, as the sun melted into the sea, Miles stood on the same balcony where his story began. The city below hummed, alive, loud, real. Daniel joined him, hands in his pockets. So, he said, do you ever miss it? The spotlight, the noise? Miles smiled faintly. Sometimes. But now I know I don't need it to exist. Daniel chuckled. You really did change. Not changed, Miles replied. Finally became who I was supposed to be. They clinked glasses, watching the city lights flicker like constellations. In the heart of Accra, a man who once hid behind power found peace in imperfection. The contest that was meant to prove his worth ended up revealing his soul. And though the world still called him a billionaire, Miles Harrington had finally learned the truth. That wealth means nothing if it can't buy you honesty with yourself. If you like this story, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications for more interesting stories. See you soon. Bye.